Hello and welcome. We are taping for the first time tonight. It's October 4th, 2021. First time since late February of 2020. So it's an exciting night for my wonderful crew and myself. And we've got some other firsts to tell you about. My guest tonight is the first Latino educator to win the very prestigious and special award of the Minnesota Teacher of the Year. Natalia Benjamin is with me, and she drove up from Rochester, where she is a language teacher working with English learners, and she teaches an ethnic studies class. Yes, so we appreciate your coming up for this. Another first, and that is that you're the first educator from the Rochester area to win this award too, and it's been something we've done in Minnesota for 57 years, so a lot of firsts here. Well, this last year, up until the very present, year, almost 2 years, has been so stressful for everybody, but I think and read and believe that probably teachers have had about the hardest role, along with nurses and doctors and medical people. But how have you weathered it, Natalia?
Yeah, thank you for asking. It's been very different for sure. We, like everybody else, right? We left back in February last year, thinking we'd be back a few weeks later, and that did not happen. I think that first ending of the 2019-2020 school year, there was a lot of adjustments to be done, trying to recreate through a virtual platform what we were doing in person, and rethinking how we would enable students not only to get to the content, but also to be able to learn in social ways like we did before. So that was a challenge, lots of just learning the technology for many teachers, and just trying to get the lessons available for students, figuring out who had access, who didn't have access, how do we provide access to those students that didn't have it. So definitely a big learning curve at the beginning of the pandemic.
Did you have many students who did not have computers at home?
Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
That made it really extra hard then.
Yeah, and many students were on their phones trying to do their work, and then trying to figure out, as teachers, if something wasn't working, what kind of device do you have on your other end? So if I need to show you how to upload a picture to a slide or how to do it, and I don't have the device that you have, how do we troubleshoot that so that we can help you on the other end? And so not just the computers, but then access to Wi-Fi and internet, because many students were using their personal phones, or they were out of minutes, and just trying to figure out how do we enable that access to Wi-Fi so that they can get the lessons
just that
virtually.
Technical, it's a huge part of the challenge. Were you, prior to this last couple of years, a techie person? Did it come easily, or was it hard for you?
So luckily, I felt very comfortable with the technology. I'm always willing to try new things, and so that piece came naturally to me. So I was fortunate enough to be able to navigate that without too much troubleshooting, but it was definitely a big learning curve, I think, also as we were trying to figure out what worked best for everybody.
Years ago, I interviewed another Teacher of the Year, Tom Rademacher, and this was in 2014, I think. And he said he thought that about 28% of the teachers just recently are thinking of retiring or quitting because of the hard year and a half they've had. Would you say that this sounds kind of in the ballpark in terms of teachers who are overwhelmed?
Yeah, I think definitely the teaching workforce is overwhelmed, and I think we look at just the challenges that we've had teaching through the past year. So many changes. It felt like we never got a chance to get everything worked out, because as soon as we did, we had to switch to a different mode. And so there were lots of changes last year. And as we're coming back this year, trying to figure out where students are at, everybody's just really, really tired trying to keep up with the demands of the job. But I think in addition to that, realizing that just like everybody else, the personal challenges that have happened. And so lots of people have suffered loss, just like the rest of the population. And lots of people are trying to provide daycare, or if their own children are sick. And so those same stresses that everybody else has, in addition to trying to navigate COVID and everything else in the classroom with our students. And so combining those two, and then the stresses of our students, because they're going through a lot, I think makes it just really challenging right now.
Yeah, it sounds, overwhelming doesn't sound like too strong of a word as a teacher. Now you're back in the classroom with your kids now, right?
Yes, we're back in person this fall.
And does that look, I should tell you she's at Century High School too. I neglected to give the name of your high school. Does it look to you and the other teachers there that this is going to hopefully hold as the way it's going to be handled?
We really hope so. I think at the secondary level and definitely at the high school level, we have the advantage that lots of students are vaccinated. And so I think as people may have exposures or are close to other contacts, we are able to maintain some students in school that are vaccinated. So I think that helps with trying to keep in-person schooling as far as right now. And so we're just hoping that we can keep moving forward. We do have pockets of students that have been quarantined and that have to stay home for a number of days before they can come back. And so there's still disruptions happening. Right now, we still need to make sure that we are having students at home access to the lessons. We have an online school, so those students are 100% online, and then we have the in-person, and those students are 100% in person. But with the students that are quarantined, just trying to check in and making sure, do you still have questions about the lessons? We are not logging in virtually simultaneously like we did back last year, but we are trying to meet everybody's needs, both in person and those that are quarantined.
Okay. Out of this hard time, there are some benefits. Have you learned anything that you want to take with you as you go forward as a teacher, as an educator, as a leader in the field of education?
Yeah, I think just remembering that our students need lots of just personalized relationships at the end of the day. I think, of course, the content is important. It's important for them to learn about the different topics in their different classes, but at the end of the day, I want them to know that they're more important than the deadlines or the homework and everything else that they need to do. And so I think if we're able to just remind them of that as well, that they're important and that they matter, I think we'll be able to move forward. There's lots of stresses in their lives right now, and I think they need that emotional support just to be successful in school.
When I read about your being nominated, one of the things they said is how much one of the people recommending you, nominating you, said you cared so much for the individual child as well as giving them, content, giving them attention as students and children, youth, which is so great to hear. I mean, looking at the total person, the whole person.
Yes, and especially right now, because coming back from being virtually for over a year, I think there's a lot of added stresses in their life, and so it's important for us to acknowledge that. And I think it's also important for us to allow them to know that we're also going through a lot of the same stuff, so that we can all come together and just be supportive of each other. And I think that's important, so that they they can cope with the stressors that they're dealing with.
Yeah, I have not heard a lot of teachers talk about sharing much about their stresses or stressors, but just thinking off the top of my head here, that sounds like a really interesting way for them then to feel like they can tell more about their personal stressors too.
Absolutely. I think, and I'll share just something really quick, but I had family members passed from COVID, and so I also knew some of my students were going through the same stuff. And so I think when I was able to share that, if I'm gone, it's because of this, and they knew what was happening, they were able to also verbalize those things. I had a student who, a few days later shared, "I'm sorry I can't concentrate, but my cousin passed away last week." And so I don't think there's things they would have shared if I wasn't willing to share those things as well.
So you modeled the okayness
Yeah.
of being honest with your feelings, right?
Absolutely. And I think something that's very important to me as well is identity work in the classroom. And if I want them to be willing to share their stories, I think I should be willing to share those as well. And I think that's also a way to just build community and just be able to know that we are human beings and that our experiences matter, and we can get through those together.
Yeah, getting through things together has such a strong boost to the human heart, doesn't it? I mean, that phrase is great. Identity work is something I couldn't define it if you press me on it, but I have some hunches. But would you just define, because I know you've done workshops on it and done some writing about it, studied obviously a lot about it. How do you define identity work?
Sure. And especially I think through high school years, we know that our young adults are going through that time in their life where they're trying to figure out who they are, they're trying to find themselves. And so when we're looking at identity work is helping them understand who they are, and also in relationship with society. And many of the students that come through the doors of the classroom are multilingual learners and multilingual students. Many are either first or second generation immigrant families, and so they may have a lot of just feeling like they're being pulled in different directions, and so it's important.
And they probably are.
Right,
Mm-hmm.
and so being able to put that into words and for them to be able to get to know their cultures better, their parents better, and how they relate to those things better. And so we try to create opportunities for them to explore those topics.
And you do that in the ethnic studies class and the English learning class?
Yes.
In both?
Yes, I do it in
neat.
both. And then in the ethnic studies class, I think it's important so that we can build a community before we start tackling hard topics related to justice and history and other things.
Oh, that's interesting. That sounds great. I'm guessing you have kids from many different ethnic groups in Rochester, right? I mean,
Yeah, we do many. We have over 50 languages represented in their district.
do you?
In my class, probably 5 to 7 different languages that are there.
And speaking of languages, this woman has 4 languages that I know of that you write and read, and most of them speak: Spanish, English, French, and Russian, correct?
Yes. So I had I think my parents really wanted to give me lots of opportunities.
Went to a French immersion school?
Yeah, so it was a French
In
immersion
Guatemala City. We should give them that much. Huh?
school. Yeah, so everything was in French: math, history, science, everything.
Everything. And you must have fallen in love with French as a language because you pursued it then more in graduate work, right?
Yeah, and it was the way we did things, and so it just came as the language of school for me. And so as I looked at graduate school, I went to, I chose that as the area of focus, as it was something that I was familiar with.
I was so intrigued when she went to undergraduate school at Brigham Young. You majored in molecular biology, right?
I did.
So that's quite a switch from science to the languages. And just briefly, how did that evolve? How did you make that switch?
Yeah, I've always loved science, and so I wanted to do research, and that's why I pursued that as an undergrad. My husband and I started our family shortly after that, and it was very important for us to have our children be bilingual. And so when I had a choice to go back to school, then I decided to pursue that because languages had been such an important part of my life as well, that I wanted to learn more about that. And so I switched gears at that point.
Was it hard to let go of the science where everything is so cut, and dried and clear and precise?
I don't think so. I think that the way of thinking and the methodology just it's something that I keep with me, and I think it influences a lot of the way I do things. Just always asking questions and trying to find possible solutions and answers into what I do.
That's a scientific sort of model too, isn't it? The question asking and finding solutions and research. How did you get from Guatemala to Minnesota? That's another curious question I have.
Sure. My husband's actually a native Minnesotan, and so
okay, I thought maybe.
Yes. So about 10 years ago, he was looking at different opportunities, and so he, one of the ideas was we could move closer to his family, and so that's why we moved to Minnesota about 10 years ago.
I was asking her earlier if her parents were both alive and could celebrate with you, and you said yes. And it must be hard to be so far away from your home, though, too.
It's gotten easier because with technology we can communicate. Yes, way easier than 20 years ago. But they come and visit often, as often as they can. They love to celebrate their grandchildren's achievements, and so they keep in touch, and we try to go back home and visit as often as we can as well.
Another curious question I have is, when you look at our education system that we have here in our country, obviously there are changes that everyone has some ideas we should make, but what are some that you look at and think, oh, if I could be Secretary of Education, this is what I would like to do differently? Are there some things that jump out?
Let me think. I think I have a couple of things that I would love for our students to have access to. And as you know, languages are a passion of mine.
Right.
But we know that the best time for anyone to learn languages is when they're young. And I think if we could have all of our students be able to access that while they're young, that would make such a great impact, because at least for me, it taught me that I could see the world in different ways. I had a different way of thinking depending on the languages that I was able to tap into, and I was able to expand the way I view the world. And I think that would work for everybody. It would be a great addition to our education system, and it would impact our multilingual learners in very positive ways. We know that when students have access to literacy in their home languages, they excel in school.
I bet.
A lot more than when they don't. And so I think that's something that I would advocate for, that we could have resources for that to be a possibility.
And children pick up language so much easier when they're 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, don't they, than
Absolutely.
older.
Yeah. I think the other thing I would dream of is having a school maybe system that's a little bit more flexible, where students can have access to more hands-on learning, and that's not always possible depending on access, to teachers or classes or buildings, and depending on that. And so I think that's something that I would love to see more of.
What's an example of hands-on in the language arena?
In the language arena. So, for example, there's one activity that I have my students do, and it's a little bit more of a real-world application. And in the languages is, a lot of times we focus a lot on the grammar, the vocabulary, right? All these important aspects of language. But what I want my students to truly get out is how to be good communicators and how to be able to use the language for a purpose. And so one project that we do is interviews, and they get to go interview members of the community to be able to tell their stories, and then they come back and put that together into like a video story, and they look at what are assets that these people they interviewed have that they could apply to their lives. So that's one way to make
that's
language
a great example
in practice.
A great example of a real world experience that would prepare them and also give them insights. I want you to be my teacher if I get to go back to school. Oh, it sounds fun. With all the languages you speak, do you identify just sort of in your core mostly as a Spanish speaker or English speaker or French speaker?
Probably a Spanish speaker at the core. My family we just have lots of fun times. So when I can't find a word, it comes out in Spanish, and so yes, definitely Spanish.
You dream in Spanish, I bet.
Yes,
that's the test, isn't it?
Yes, for sure.
We just have a few minutes left. I have to ask you: have you had a teacher in your life that has inspired you more than others?
I don't know if I can pick one person, but I think there's a couple of groups of people that I would love to acknowledge. One of them is a group of teachers of heritage speakers, and I was able to meet this network of wonderful educators here in Minnesota about 2 or 3 years ago, and collaborating with them just makes me a more reflective teacher. It helps me question the why. It helps me question the pedagogies that I use, and just trying to get better at what I do every day. I think the other people I would have to pick are my co-teachers, my colleagues that are wonderful mentors and just wonderful people that just also help me be better every day.
Going back to the heritage teachers, I'm not sure I understand what that would encompass.
Sure. So there are some let me give you an example. When there's students that come from different cultural groups, but they're born and raised in the United States, they may not have access to their home languages outside of their home. And so they may not be able to have the same language development that they would have if they had learned those languages in their home countries. And so they're still trying to develop those skills, and they have a lot of maybe ways to speak it at home or at the store or in other settings, but they haven't had a chance to dive into some other aspects of the language, whether it's reading or writing or other contexts besides the smaller ones they have access to. And so teaching heritage speakers would mean tapping into their assets and the languages they have and helping them grow in that language while they're here in the United States.
That makes sense. Yeah, that would be very hard, I would think, to make that bridge back without extra support. Yeah. Well, you've got a year ahead that's not just a typical year. You go to Washington for a week, right? Is that still part of the...
We're hoping. So
Hoping
depending on how things develop, you know, with COVID and everything.
Right.
But yeah, that's the plan.
Well, have a wonderful year. I know you'll have to be doing extra interviews and speaking and so forth too. It will make your year extra busy, but enjoy it. And again, so happy to meet you. Thank you for coming, and big congratulations on this wonderful one. She was chosen.
Thank you so much.
I've been talking with Natalia Benjamin, the 2021 Minnesota Teacher of the Year. It's been really, really interesting and fun getting to know her. Thank you for being with us. I'll be back again next week, back in the studio here at SBNN. So have a good week, and we'll see you next week.